to talk to you about an interesting topic, and it's, oh, hold on, I see some more students coming. Come in, ladies. There's another school that just come in, folks. Just grab a seat. The students from Wabansi, which is 50 miles from here, they're in my class at Wabansi. By the way, I should point out that we have some students here from Oakton, and 4 other colleges where I teach are not represented today. But, let's see. Yeah, they probably won't come. Okay, anyway, what I'm going to do today is talk to you about a very important subject, and that's called biodiversity. And I'm also going to discuss, first of all, what it is, its benefits, threats to it, and solutions to biodiversity. Now let me explain to you, first of all, what biodiversity is. I'm going to get my transparencies. Okay. Biodiversity means essentially the wide variety of organisms on the planet. Let me give you an actual definition of biodiversity. Move a little closer. Okay, biodiversity is the variety of organisms considered at all levels, from genetic variants belonging to the same species through arrays of species to arrays of genera, families, and still higher taxonomic levels. To put it in plain English, it means essentially the wide variety of genes, ecosystems, and species. Genes, we all know, that includes the genetic makeup, and as we can tell, we have different animals that look alike, such as various species of finches and other birds, but yet they're different because they have different genes, and this is something in which biodiversity is included in biodiversity. Then, of course, we have ecosystems, which includes places like the rainforest, the deserts, savannas, the ocean realm, freshwater, saltwater. Everything belongs to an ecosystem. You even have sub-ecosystems, which means like even a plant growing on a tree in the rainforest is its own ecosystem because it has its own life, including bacteria, insects, etc. So it's a very important topic because our lives invariably depend on it. As a matter of fact, just to let you know, everybody in this room, and I assume everybody on the planet, is not living alone. And what I mean by that is, in you, on you, and all over you, you also have organisms. Now, I don't want to scare you, but they're natural. You don't even know they're there, but they're there, such as bacteria, which live in you and on you, and mites, which live up there by the eyebrows, which you can't see because they're very small. So we also have our own biodiversity, and as you can see, for the most part, we remain healthy because of these organisms. So these organisms are very important for the health of the ecosystem.
Batteries.
Okay, then just plug that in. The battery is on, yeah. We have a little camera problem here today. So Shaw, he's my photographer today. He's going to plug this in there, and then there's a plug over there. I see the light on, Shaw. Is it still recording?
It's still recording, but it says the battery's low.
Okay, then we'll go to plan B. Yeah, use the end from the cord there. Sometimes technology gives you problems. Okay, anyway. Now, let me give you some examples of biodiversity, and then I'm going to go into a lot more detail. This is a number of reasons, most of which is its beauty. Okay, what I'm showing you next is a chart of countries which have the most biodiversity, which means the largest amount of different types of organisms, and then I'll tell you what type of organisms exist. We look over here on table 1. I know it's kind of hard to see, but I will read it to you anyway. Over here on this left, it lists the country and the square miles, okay? And the way that it's not square miles, it's square kilometers. Whenever we talk about science, for the most part, we use the metric system, and we're using square kilometers. We should point out that the largest countries, now this is not necessarily in order of organisms, this is just in order of size, which means square areas. Goes all the way from China, the USA, Brazil, Australia, down to Ecuador. These are the countries which have what's known as mega diversity, a tremendous amount of various species of organisms. Okay? And again, you can imagine that the majority of these countries, with the highest number of organisms, they may not be the largest country in area, but they are the largest in biodiversity. This includes the areas of the tropical rainforest. These are the ones with basically the majority of organisms. It is estimated that in the tropical rainforest, more than 50% of all known animals, plants, fungi, bacteria, and all those others live there. Okay? And I should point out there are many yet undiscovered. They are discovering about 10,000 insects a year based on my information. And I'm going to show you some newly discovered insects in a few minutes. Now, for some reason, everything here seems to be doubled here. I think there's something wrong. Right. If we were to take the different types of organisms based on their kingdoms, it would look something like this. And the kingdoms are the highest group, and we have basically, well, actually they're the second highest, for our purposes we'll call them the highest. Next to super kingdom, we have basically 6 types of organisms. We have animals, plants, fungi, those you all know. Then we have little things called protists, which are basically single-celled organisms, such as the amoeba, the parameciums, euglena, little single-cell. They have flagella swimming around, while they actually cause the organism to move. And we have 2 types of bacteria. Now, recently, the taxonomists, these are the people who classify organisms, have put bacteria into 2 major groups. One called the eubacteria, which are the modern bacteria, and the older bacteria called the archaebacteria, and these are more primitive. Even though they still exist, they have a more primitive structure. In other words, with new techniques of biochemistry and electron microscopy, they're differentiating the 2 types of bacteria based on their cell wall and their structure. Okay, so now also, if we look at this chart, which is one of my favorites, we notice, believe it or not, that this is a pie chart. We also notice that the majority of organisms on the planet, believe it or not, are animals. Okay? So far, there's a total of 1.8 million organisms known on the planet, and that includes all the kingdoms that I mentioned, and the majority of which are animals. There's probably 1 million animals known. Okay, and what do I say known? Because there are some estimates as to how many are out there. The estimates range from 10 million to 100 million, and that includes everything. We just don't know, and that's why it's critical that we keep the ecosystems intact so we find out what's there. Anyway, there are roughly 1 million known animals, of which the majority are insects, okay? And just to give you an example, the largest group of insects, the largest number of species are beetles, with so far around 300,000 known species of beetles, which is quite a bit, followed by the butterflies and moths. And just to give you another example, there's only about 12,000 known species of ants. So as you can see, beetles are quite prevalent. So anyway, we have the plant kingdom. Then we have the plant kingdom, which is the second largest, with around 280,000 known species of plants. Okay, and then we followed by here's the plants there, followed by the fungi, which has around between 69 to 80,000 known species. And then, believe it or not, the protists, we have around 57,000 or 58,000. And then the bacteria is only around 4,800 species known. Now, again, the key word is known because it's very difficult to grow bacteria in environments that we can't get at. To give you an example, there are probably many bacteria down at the depths of the ocean over by the Marianas Trench, which is about 6 miles down, and there are some organisms such as crabs and sea cucumbers and all these other things down there. It's just that it's very difficult to obtain the pressures and the environmental conditions down there on Earth. We can get some pressure we can build a pressure chamber and grow bacteria, but we also have to find out what is their proper growth medium, such as, they need nutrients too, and it's very difficult. So I believe there are millions more bacteria, or perhaps thousands, waiting to be discovered. We just don't know how to get them yet. Now, we're all familiar with the common types, such as Staphylococcus, Streptococcus, things like this, which we're all familiar with because they cause diseases. But the majority of bacteria are pretty good. Without them, we'd be dead. Now, let me show you a picture of some hotspots of biodiversity. What do we mean by a hotspot? Well, this is where there's a lot of biodiversity and there's danger in them being lost. Here we see a chart from location of biodiversity hotspots. If we notice the red spots over here, these are the tropical rainforests. This is where you have a tremendous amount of organisms over here, and they are in danger of becoming extinct because of human activity. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Over here we have Indonesia, we have this part of China, we have over here this part of Africa, this part of Africa, and these two parts of South America. And here we see a chaparral. A chaparral is generally an area that contains shrubs, shrub-like plants. Okay, now, over here, you see a distribution of bird species. And I should point out that there's roughly 9,600 known bird species. And if you look at this chart, notice that in all of North America, with the exception of Mexico and below, we only have a few hundred species of birds. Up here, even in the tundra, the Taiga region, like Canada, we only have 50 to 100 birds. Where, as we go farther south, notice here in Costa Rica and Central America, we have hundreds of species of birds. See those? And so we have quite a few birds there too. And as you notice, the larger number of birds, the farther south we go. And unfortunately, we have a problem with human values because people value the price of birds more than their beauty, which to me, the beauty and just to know they exist is priceless, is worth more than getting a few bucks or a few $1,000s per bird, which unfortunately is part of the market price. Here we have a picture of a beetle, newly discovered beetle found on the top of the rainforest, actually on the canopy, by a group called the Jason Project. The Jason Project is a group headed by Robert Ballard. Now, Robert Ballard has become famous for two reasons. He discovered the location of the Titanic, number one, and two, he is the one that discovered the deep sea rifts. That's where the tectonic plates connect, and he found gigantic animals living there, such as tube worms, which are very big, 10 feet tall, about an inch thick, and giant clams, which, as we all know, they're not kosher. But anyway, we have those. Okay, now, what I'm going to do, before I go into some of the threats to biodiversity, I just want to show you a chart of various drugs taken from plants found in the rainforest and other places. And this is just a partial list. The list is almost in the thousands, okay? There's almost 1,000 chemicals or more derived from common compounds found in the jungles and the beautiful rainforest. And let me give you some examples. We have digitalis, which many of you know is a heart drug. Up here, we have L-Dopa, which is part of the problem of Parkinson's disease. Okay, it's a neurotransmitter. People with Parkinson's disease have a problem making. So we actually have like the Belzapine giving you L-Dopa. And then we have penicillin. And that's a very famous one, folks. We all know about penicillin. And that, believe it or not, came from a fungus. Okay? So these are just some of the drugs. By the way, perhaps one of the most famous drugs and chemicals on the planet is the simple aspirin. Okay? And we know about aspirin. Okay? And aspirin is also coming from a plant. As a matter of fact, speaking of aspirin, I once knew a guy that I worked with. He was a real pain in the neck, and people were telling me, this guy Joe, he's such a pain in the neck, he can give a headache to an aspirin. Okay, but he's the only one I know. Okay, now, there are a few of those around. All right. Over here, we have another one called vinblastine, and this is my favorite. We have two of these. These are the chemicals you should know. I have a feeling in the future they'll become world famous because vinblastine and vincristine are the ones produced by my friend, the rosy periwinkle, the one I just showed you a few minutes ago. Okay, so these have incredible properties: anti-cancer, anti-AIDS, and I believe it's anti-leukemia and Hodgkin's disease. Okay? So, I'm telling you folks, many of the diseases we have now could probably be wiped out if we don't wipe out the rainforests first.
Are any of these plants being used now as far as chemotherapy drugs?
Yes, that's why all these, this is a whole list of them.
They're all being used?
Yeah, in fact, I have a bigger list. I'm glad you asked that. Yes, I made a big list of them. These are just some. By the way, there's almost thousands. See? Here, these are all some of them. These are in alphabetical order. Okay? These are all drugs. Over here are the names of the drugs, and in fact, these are all names of drugs. Products from the rainforest. These are all substances. These are in alphabetical order. There's a whole potload of them. Now, I don't know what each one does, but most of these are drugs. Here, even cone snails, which are very deadly. These are the gastropods related to clams and oysters. That they have one shell and they have a harpoon, which is quite poisonous. Now, the fact that that's poisonous is very good for us because they know that that poison can be used to benefit us. They're actually painkillers in humans. They cause pain, but yet if they're used properly, they can take away pain. Isn't that incredible? I'm telling you, we have probably millions of stuff out there just waiting to be had. And I'll tell you how we find it, too. Here we see a whole bunch of stuff, some more. See? Quinine. You heard about quinine, right? That's a very famous one. Taxol. Taxol controls uterine cancer or ovarian cancer, okay? And that's from the leaf of a certain tree. The only thing is, we have a problem here, and the problem is we're cutting down all the yew trees to get the Taxol, and then when they're gone, there's no more yew trees. It is better for the chemists to try to synthesize these things in the lab, and I believe with Taxol they're having a hard time doing it, but I imagine with enough energy and investment, they will do this. Okay, so this is just a partial list of the chemicals found in the rainforest, which is part of our biodiversity. And again, if the biodiversity goes, we all go. This is something I want to really stress. And this is what I stress in my environmental classes, because we're in deep trouble. And due to the pursuit of money and business as usual, the world does not take priority. It appears to be always money. Now, I have here a couple pictures that I'm going to show you. This one comes from an envelope that I got. Somehow all the environmental companies submit my name, so they're always trying to send me stuff, trying to buy stuff. But nevertheless, it's good because I make use of it. This is one of my favorite pictures. This was actually the envelope of a letter I received from some organization. And what they wanted to do was to try to prevent us from having the world cut down into buildings. Now, let me tell you something. Here, get a load of this here. This was at the cover, and unfortunately it's true. Is the American home making them homeless? And what is them? Them are the animals, the plants, and the greatest botanists of all, the indigenous people who live in the rainforests, okay? We're all familiar with these tribes of Indians that live in the rainforest, but you might think they're savages and they don't know any better, but do you realize these are the real botanists, okay? These know what drugs come from where. They may not know the names, which they probably don't, but they can tell you from what leaf, what plant, what root, or even what animal the plants come from. These indigenous tribes people are the real botanists. Now what's happening, especially in Brazil, these people are also part of our biodiversity, by the way, and yet we're losing them also at an incredible rate because of the greed of the government and a lot of the people in pursuit of their own needs and in the pursuit of just trying to eke out a living. And And there's a lot more to it than just greed, folks, I should say, why we have a problem with biodiversity. It involves sociology, it involves politics, it involves people just trying to make ends meet, and of course, it involves overpopulation by humans. With more on that some other time, we can talk on that for hours. And by the way, one other thing, you see this example of a monkey or a frog? Well, do you know how scientists find drugs? Real simple, they just follow the apes around. This may sound funny, but it's true. Since apes are similar to humans, even though they live in the jungle, they have similar ailments, such as parasitic infections and things like this. There was a book written by Mark J. Plotkin called Medicine Quest, which is one of the greatest books I ever read. And he talks about plants and animals in the rainforest. In fact, there is one chapter titled Plants of the Apes. And in that book, it's called Plants of the Apes. I know you think there was a movie called Planet of the Apes, but the chapter is called Plants of the Apes. And he makes a point that the way that people find out about certain drugs is follow the apes around, and they see what plants they take. And how do they know that these plants are not used for food? Because just like you, if something tastes bad, you grimace and say, yeah, this stuff tastes terrible. So what they do is they follow the apes around the monkeys, and they see they put certain leaves in their mouths, and sure enough, they grimace. But yet, they know that this is good for them because this will relieve them of parasites or whatever they have. Okay? By the way, just one more I should tell you. Do you know what the world's largest parasite is? I should mention this. It's the Eiffel Tower because it's a site in Paris. I just thought I'd mention it. Okay, now. Anyway, now. Okay, I know. All right. Okay, now. Over here, we have some of the rainforest, the remnants of one, which people think will be used to grow crops, okay? The only thing is, when you grow crops in the rainforest, it's not going to last long, okay? Why? Because the soil, believe it or not, is one of the crummiest on the planet, okay? You might think, despite all that lush vegetation, over 50% of all the animals, plants, bacteria, fungi known on the planet, that this soil will be great for growing things. It is lousy for growing crops. Why is that? Real simple. The only good part about the tropical rainforest soil, which has a name called oxisol, O-X-I-S-O-L, is the fact that just the top layer is loaded with nutrients. Why? Because it gets most of its nutrients from the dead leaves and animals that decompose. Okay? So tropical rainforest soil are pretty crummy to grow crops in. Just to let you know. I know you might think the opposite. Now, why do we have so many problems on the planet? And I'm going to mention a couple of them. As I mentioned earlier, greed and overpopulation. But a lot of it is misplaced priorities. I'm going to show you two pictures. Who can name this fellow here? What's his name? Now, everybody knows him, right? Okay. Who is this fellow here? That's some guy. Who knows him? Okay, guys. Who is more important for Chicago of these two? Probably him, right. Because he's more important for the whole world. But yet, nobody knows him. Although I am proud to say that I went to a dinner with him once here in the Chicago area because I teach at Columbia College downtown. And the chairman of our department, he's a chemist, and since we're part-time, occasionally he invites us to go to these Friday night meetings of the American Chemical Society. This fellow's name, who happens to be a very famous Mexican by the name of Mario Molina. Does that ring a bell? Okay. You see? Everybody knows Michael Jordan. What's Michael Jordan do? Basketball. What's this guy do? Nobody knows. I'll tell you what he did. Okay. Did you what? Yes, but what did he do? Okay, in 1995, he won the Nobel Prize. For what? Well, he was the one, along with two others, named Sherry Rowland and another German fellow whose name escapes me at the moment, who discovered how the ozone layer gets destroyed by the chlorofluorocarbons. Okay? Now, it is because of him that we realize we have to phase out the CFCs, or chlorofluorocarbons, which are found in the air conditioners, especially of cars and other refrigerants. Okay? So, he won the Nobel Prize because he figured out the mechanism for it. Okay? And it is because of him, basically, that now, I'm happy to say, they predict the ozone is on the rise. He's phased out the production of ozone. And that means that everybody in this room, as well as those living in the southern part of the planet, will not be cooked by ultraviolet light, thanks to this fellow. So you see, one of the reasons why we have, why a lot of people don't know about these things is because we don't publicize it. He is inevitably more important than Michael Jordan on the whole scheme of things when you look at it, right? Because, let's put it this way, if everybody is cooked and dead and burned, there's not going to be anybody to play basketball or let alone watch it, right? So you see, we have a warped priority system on this planet. As a matter of fact, for those of you who don't know, I have family in Israel. In fact, I used to live there, as Dr. Brown said. And we have a neighbor next door. And I told him, I worked in Chicago. And you know what he was able to do? Name off all the Bulls players. Okay? I swear. He knew Horace Grant and all these other guys. And this was about 10 years ago. Okay? So all over the world, hey, Michael Jordan, you know, the whole world knows him. And you go 6,000 miles one way, they know him. 6,000 miles another. You see? I bet you 1 or 2 out of millions know this guy. Okay? Again, Mario Molina. He won the Nobel Prize in 1995 in chemistry. Yeah.
What did he do?
He discovered the mechanism that destroys the ozone layer by the CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons. See, chlorofluorocarbons contain chlorine, and essentially what he discovered was that the chlorine breaks up in the stratosphere, the upper atmosphere where the majority of the ozone is, and the chlorine robs an oxygen from the ozone. The formula for ozone is O3, which means it has 3 oxygen. So it sort of kidnaps one. And then it gives you back atmospheric oxygen, which is O2. Now that's good to breathe, but due to its physical and chemical properties, it cannot help us in absorbing the ultraviolet light which comes from the sun. You see? That's what he did. So, otherwise we'd all be wearing big hats and big glasses. Okay? Now, there was, under the Reagan administration, there was a fellow by the name of Donald Hodel, who was the Secretary of the Interior, I believe. He replaced James Watt. And he said that, well, it's no problem. We'll just wear big hats and sunglasses. Well, so you got to put big hats and sunglasses on all the animals, ants, rabbits, lions, and everything else. See, this was their attitude way back when. We knew there was a problem. Okay? So, folks, whenever you hear the name Mario Molina, he is the one you should worship and not Michael Jordan, because he is inevitably more important for the planet. And I'm not saying Michael Jordan is bad, but I'm just saying I don't think it does too well to think more about him than protecting the planet. Okay, now, I have here some more pictures that I'm going to show you, which I think you should all be aware of, that have to do with biodiversity and its losses. Who knows what this is? What kind of fish? Of course, it's a fish. Huh? What is it? Okay. It's a Holoplastus atlanticus. What is it? Many of you are eating it, which you shouldn't eat it. This is the, what is it? You know? That girl, raise your hand. It's the orange roughy. Okay, what's wrong with the orange roughy? I'll tell you what's wrong with it and why you shouldn't eat it. First of all, it's delicious. Number 1, it's probably one of the best fish available. 2, it was only discovered in 1979. 3, it's already on the verge of extinction. 4, these fish, now, they live to be 150 years old. Now, wait a minute, now you could ask, I just said they were discovered in 1979. That's 22 years ago. How do they know that this fish lives 150? Well, by doing scale studies. That's how they determine the age of fish. Okay? They look at scales. Now, you know how long it takes to reach sexual maturity? Almost double that of a human. 25 to 30 years. So, what's happening with them? They're slowly being depleted. Why? First of all, why did we all of a sudden start going for the deeper fish? Because we're depleting the upper level fish, right? That's number 1. So some genius says, hey, maybe there's some fish down below. Let's try to find them. So sure enough, they found orange roughy, which you must admit is very delicious. That's one of its problems, okay? It's delicious and expensive. It costs like 10 bucks a pound, which to me, it should be $100 a pound. That should discourage any use of it. Just like gasoline, that's another problem. You see, so this is a problem. It tastes good, but it's almost on the verge of extinction now, okay? You have to watch that. Now, I know you still want to eat it. This is the point. I don't think we should. All right, now, I have here a list, just thought I'd show you, put out by the Audubon Society of what fish you should be able to get. Those in the green zone are the ones where we have the most available. And I should say this includes things like salmon, halibut, tilapia. The yellow zone means there is not a lot of information, but for the time being, you're able to eat them. And then those in the red zone, which includes the orange roughy, swordfish, Chilean sea bass, monkfish, scallops, snappers, shrimps, etc., should not be eaten. Not because they're poisonous or anything, but because they're becoming endangered, okay? And this is true of all sharks. There it says, mako, thresher, and all sharks. You shouldn't eat sharks. Sharks are very good for the ecosystem. However, another reason for a destruction of the ecosystems is that we demonize animals. The most common way of demonization is in the movies, and of course we know the movie Jaws sort of demonized sharks. But I would bet my bottom dollar that there's not one person in this room who knows somebody who died from a shark, right? Maybe a loan shark, that's it. All right. Okay. I think you'll agree there. Okay. Here we see, I don't think any of you know what this is. This again is another organism, part of our biodiversity. These are called copepods, which are the base of the food chain. These are very small organisms. They're about a third the size of a pencil dot. You can barely see it with the naked eye, which means without a microscope. And these are the food for other larger animals. Now this is a pretty one. And there are a few hundred species of various types. These make up the base of the food chain. And we have to worry about these because we cannot afford to put chemicals in the ocean. Okay, next. I'm going to show you another cause of biodiversity, loss. No. Over here, we have a picture of Russia. And here we see a whole picture of what the former Soviet Union was. Over here, we have the area enlarged. This is the enlarged area that you see over there, sort of the southwest corner of the former USSR. And over here, we have a picture of a lake called the Aral Sea. The Aral Sea was once the fourth largest lake in the world. Now look at what a great deal of the Aral Sea looks like. It's a desert with ships in the middle of it. These are fishing boats. Now you might say, what are these boats fishing for? Well, the answer is not land trout. The answer is they're not fishing. Why aren't they fishing? Because there's no more water left in this part of the lake. Remember, this used to be the fourth largest lake on the planet. We're talking about the planet Earth, the one you're on. Just to make sure you know, these are real fishing boats and not toys. Okay? How could such a thing happen? How could fishermen let their ships just stay there and sink down to the bottom of the sand? The answer is simple. It's simple if this lake is not being fed by the two rivers which are supposed to feed it. What happened to the water? Well, you know, Russia is not known, it was not known for its economy, right? I don't think it will ever. However, in order for the Russians to eke out a living, they had to use that water that was going into the Aral Sea and divert it for cotton growing. And this is what you get. You get the dead Aral Sea. Did that help the economy of the Soviet Union? Of course not. They're still in a financial mess. Okay? And there's lots of, I have come up with lots of cures for them, but I don't think people will listen to me. But we should have done it 20 years ago. Instead of being at war with them, which is what we were, they spent all their money trying to build more bombs and guns. We were, but we had more money, so we could still build, and then they have to keep up with us. They built. Meanwhile, we caused them to go bankrupt when it would have been better to use both our money building up each other's country instead of trying to build weapons to destroy each other's country. For some reason, I think like this, but the military doesn't. But I don't know. Okay, now, earlier this morning, we were eating our breakfast. By the way, I should point out that whenever we have a breakfast like this, we call it a bagel protecting breakfast because you know how you protect bagels? You put locks on them. That's what I mentioned. Okay. All right, now, here we have a picture of Las Vegas, the suburb of Las Vegas. Right, yes. We were discussing Las Vegas today, and this is the part which most people don't see. All they see are the big hotels and the famous part of it where people go to lose their money. Over here, we have lost something more important than money. This is an actual photograph taken from the Time magazine from Earth Day of April of the year 2000, which was less than a year ago, and they show, this is a picture, I think the town's called Boomtown, I'm not sure. Is there a place called Boomtown? Someone mentioned it. I don't know. Anyway, they call this a Boomtown. And the question is here, which we didn't get totally, where has the desert gone? Okay? Now, why am I showing you this as a topic of biodiversity? Because, needless to say, even though this is a desert, there is still a tremendous amount of wildlife in the desert. You have plants, needless to say, small ones, xerophytes. The xerophyte is a plant which lives with very little amount of water, but nevertheless it still lives, such as cactus. We have bacteria, we have fungi, you have rodents, you know, little animals look like mice. You have snakes. Now where do you think those animals went? Well, a lot of them have died because it's taken over their land. Look at this. As far as you can see, buildings, buildings, buildings. However, there is something more insidious here. Let me just explain, and then I'll finish up. Number one, you know, the Earth has something called an albedo. An albedo is the natural reflection of the heat. The sunlight goes back to the Earth, right? We have the deserts to do that, and we have the ice up in the Arctic region, right? But if we're covering up the desert with a tremendous amount of buildings like this, how is the heat going to reflect? Instead, if you notice, the roads are black. And what does black do? It absorbs the heat. So we're doing just the opposite. So here, it's because of our super development that we're going to lose biodiversity. Now, even something more insidious that I see from this picture is what about water supply? Everybody here needs to take a shower, they have to cook, etc. Okay? You know, and water is not infinite. Okay? Fortunately, though, from reading the literature, most of the groundwater that's available on the planet is still not polluted. But we're going to drain out aquifers, you know, quite rapidly. And these aquifers sustain places like this, groundwater. Because we have so many people, the water's going to go, as well as the people. I just wondered, folks, I asked myself this, not to be so negative, what's going to happen if all of a sudden they run out of water in this area? What's going to happen to all these homes? People are going to have to pack up and move and lose their entire investment, right? What are you going to do? I don't know. I don't know even if they are going to lose water. But if we keep building like this, especially in areas which are prone to water shortages, like the Las Vegas, California, okay, we're going to be in trouble. So, anyway, what I have shown you today is a little bit about biodiversity, how much we have, and the threats to it. Now, as for solutions, real quick, there are lots of them. I'll just mention one of the biggest solutions we have is to control population, okay? And to return to proper priorities, okay? In other words, the priorities are the ecosystem. I feel here in America, we live high enough on the hog. We really don't have to go for more and more and more, you know? We don't have to consume more and more and more. When other countries have hardly anything, and here we have too much of everything, and this is the problem. Other countries have too much of nothing, okay? As a matter of fact, Milton Berle said, did you know what? Russia, the only thing they don't have a shortage of is shortages. And he's right. Okay, so are there any questions? I'll just leave it at that. Go ahead, ask away, folks. No questions. None. Any comments? Yes, sir.
A couple of comments. First of all, I think you told me happy you're living in Chicago. You have 1/5 of the world's supply of fresh water right at your doorstep.
Yes.
So we're going to be one of the last people that have an issue with that. Hopefully it won't be an issue. But for example, in the last 60 years, I believe, aquifers, the water table under Peking has dropped 200 feet.
From Beijing, China. Yeah.
In China. Also, we talk about the Soviet Union. This is more environmental. Environmentalism and biodiversity is very closely related.
Exactly.
Something like in certain parts of the old Soviet Union, like 1 out of 4, 1 out of every 5 babies are born with birth defects due to pollution. I mean, there's serious birth defects, leukemia, lack of limbs, significant birth defects. And these things really do come back to haunt you.
We're going to wind up paying the price. You see, we can't ignore ourselves. We can't isolate ourselves from the rest of the world because we're paying anyway. Remember when we sold wheat to the Russians? I don't see anything wrong with that myself, but the point is, we have to make everybody sort of more equal. We have to go down a little bit in the way we live, and the other countries have to go up. Yes.
Don't you think that science is helping to overcome some of these problems, like desalination of water, of salt water and stuff like that, for more water?
Yes,
And
but
aren't they doing that? Solar cells?
you're talking about like the attitude of Julian Simon. I don't know if you ever heard of him. He just died recently. He was the opposite of an environmental person. Let me just tell you what his philosophy is. He said that science will solve everything. So one answer is this. If it will solve everything, how come many species of fish are becoming extinct? We can't bring them back, okay? Because we're overfishing. We will not solve that problem. So science is maybe, we can solve some of the problem only if we work at it. You see what I'm saying? If we take a lot of money from the military and quit building these idiotic systems like the missile defense system and all this, we spend it towards helping solve these problems, then it will be done. But you always complain we don't have enough money. Hold on.
But you know that we are doing something. We have these fish farms. We are doing something about
Right. Well, one of the reasons, let me tell you about fish farms, they're susceptible to diseases. And when we say don't eat shrimp, they raise shrimp in the ocean area where they used to cut down the mangroves, you see. So it depends where you grow them. But that's true too, but I don't know if that's going to be a perfect solution because we're losing animals that normally live in the ocean, such as sharks. And they control other animals so they don't get out of hand. And you're going to have a complete disruption of the balance of nature. Unless for food, that's okay. For humans, but what about what's left in the middle of the ocean? We're destroying sharks by the millions every year. And what makes that bad is that they have a low reproductive capacity. And then other organisms are going to grow, and then they're eventually going to disrupt the whole ecosystem. It's very complicated. Yes?
Because of the likeness between ape and human,
Yeah.
you mentioned that are diseases transmitted the same way as
Okay, that all depends. Actually, that's a very good question. And for those of you who read the book The Hot Zone, anybody read that? Okay. Any of you see the movie Outbreak? I'm sure you did. That was about a real occurrence that occurred in 1989 with virus infections related to the Ebola virus. And what you mentioned was, I don't know if you know that story. They did a big deal on it on the TV show called Day One. What happened was a whole bunch of monkeys in Reston, Virginia, which were being held quarantined before they would be used for scientific experiments, they were beginning to die like crazy. Why were they dying? Because of the Ebola virus. Now this particular Ebola virus was only specific to the monkeys. This is a specific one. We were lucky that it did not jump species to humans, that particular strain. However, we just heard a couple weeks ago this woman came from Africa and she had a hemorrhagic fever similar to Ebola, but they found out it wasn't. And where'd she get it from, we don't know. It could have come from another animal. But the Ebola Zaire strain has killed a lot of people in Zaire. Remember that? So, now to answer your question, the answer is some of these organisms can jump species and infect us.
well, like common cold.
Yeah, it's possible. But the point is they don't know where Ebola comes from. But you take other things which are definitely like malaria. I mean, we know that's caused by a mosquito. Or you heard of the bubonic plague?
Yeah.
People died because the rat flea would live on the rat. However, the rat flea would first bite a person, then bite the rat, and the rat wouldn't die. bite the infected rat, then bite another person, and he picked up the disease, you see? So some diseases are transferable. That's called zoonosis, by the way. Yes, sir.
Any comments about our recycling efforts and future recycling?
Yeah, okay, first of all, depends what you're recycling and how much you're recycling. That, too, is like a feel-good thing. So, gee, I'm buying all these newspapers, so I'm going to recycle them. You know, this type of attitude is not good for the simple reason we're still cutting down trees to make more newspapers. The point is, if we would use that newspaper, and instead of cutting down trees and really recycle it to make more newspapers, we really do it the right way. Because recycling, look at these cups. What are you going to do with them? These are polystyrene. They're number 6 on the recycling scale. They're very hard to recycle. That stuff with the other plastics, 1 and 2, which are the high-density polyethylene, like milk bottles, and the Coke bottle, liter bottles, polyethylene, PET bottles, those are easier to recycle. Those you can make into things. With some of this you can't. But to answer your question, instead of having milk bottles, you know what they make with milk bottles now? Furniture. Park furniture, playground furniture, and Jackson Park Marina is made out of something called Durawood, which comes from recycled milk bottles. So anytime you're in Jackson Park, take a walk in the marina. It looks almost identical to wood, but it's not. It's made out of milk bottles, believe it or not. And also playground furniture.
Talking about bottles or the plastic?
The plastic from the bottles. Yeah, what they do is they just melt them down, extrude them, put a color in them, and they look like wood.
Would we be better off to go back to making deposits and bringing bottles?
Absolutely. I remember when I was a kid, we did it. We used to get 5 cents, a couple cents. And you know what's good? That has a double, instead of a double whammy, a double opposite. Number one, it keeps them off the street because everybody finds a bottle. Hey, that's money, right? They're going to trade it in for money. And 2, we don't have the mess out there. And this is why I was kind of discouraged that they went away from glass. We have all this plastic stuff, just throw it away. Type attitude. You know, true, a lot is recyclable, except to answer your question again, we're overwhelmed with newspapers. We have too many newspapers to recycle. We don't, you see, they don't have enough facilities. Let me just say one more thing. I used to live in Niles, by the old theater there, where they changed to the shopping center. And before they really built up the shopping center, there used to be a recycling bin every week. You know, these big Mack truck trailers used to be full with newspapers every week. And then, of course, they took them away, and I already tell with the City Hall, I called them up, why'd you do that? They said, well, people now are getting their own recycling. You know, always an excuse. But what about the people who don't have one? You know, I already tell them, I told all my friends to call them too. But it didn't do any good. But you got to keep trying. But I'll tell you this, we are making some headway in that. Unfortunately, it should have been done 50 years ago. Okay, anything else?
Is Arizona, has there been water problems in Arizona already with the building?
I believe so. Not only that, Arizona used to be good for people that had respiratory problems. Now people are getting that too because there's more people, more cars. Everybody wants the good life, so everybody goes to the good life and it's no longer good, right? See, the answer is population control. And to answer your question, take some of the money from the military and defend us by investing in all these new ways. Okay. Thank you.
Collecting is good. So I know some people have attended the meeting across the hall here. So thank you very much. Thank you.